Easier tonight. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker. I call the Honourable David Parker.
Mr. Speaker, back when I was considerably younger,
and better looking.
Considerably younger, before the last speech started, actually a lot longer than that. Mr. Speaker, over 5 years ago, I was Minister of Land Information. I was also the former member for Otago who Jackie Dean had knocked off my perch. But the local council came to see me. And they said, look, we've got this problem. We've got this piece of land called Forester Heights, and it actually is only a very small part of the lookout point, which is an issue that vexes some locals in terms of the terminology we're using around this. But anyway, the council came to see me and they said, look, we want to put it beyond doubt that this land is endowment land rather than reserve land, because if it was reserve land and it was properly set aside as a reserve, then it couldn't just be taken by the council and sold for the money to be put into some other purpose. If it's an endowment and it's an endowment property, then it's treated as an asset that the council can do what they want with, including selling and using the money for some other purpose. Now, I was aware that there was controversy around this because of some of the members of my own Labour organisation at the time and the Labour Party who had a contrary view. As Minister of Land Information, it was my duty to find out whether the council were correct or whether the opponents to sale were correct. And despite the fact that it might have been politically advantageous for me to take a political line, I never did. I actually just sought the facts. So how do you do that? Well, if you're the Minister of Land Information, the traditional view is that the Ministry writes to the Department of Conservation and seeks their advice as to the proper status of the land, because the Department of Conservation have got planners and they've also got a duty to make sure that conservation interests, including in respect of reserves, are properly dealt with. If there, as a basis of that inquiry, it becomes clear that the status of the land is incorrectly recorded on the title to the land and it needs to be fixed, then the route through to doing that is generally through the Reserves and Other Lands Disposal Bill. And there's a good tradition in this Parliament that the only things that go into the Reserves and Other Lands Disposal Bill are where it is clear that there is a mistake on the title and that is not contentious. I looked into it and I had initial advice from the Department of Conservation, who advised Land Information, who advised me that this land was properly described as endowment land. Because of the criticisms and the correspondence and the personal representations I'd had from the other side, I actually got the department, through my office, to go back and check. And they did, and they found again that it was endowment land, not reserve land. So way back then, when I was considerably younger than I am now, we put it in a bill. And the sad thing about this is that this has had quite serious financial consequences for the council, the delay here, because since this has been sitting on the order paper and being mucked around for 4 years, property prices have gone back in Oamaru. Right. The amount that they're going to get for these sections has decreased. A number of the contracts that they had to sell sections will have fallen over because they will have passed the date by which it's all gone. All of them have fallen over because they are beyond the point when they had to get their Resource Management Act consents and provide new titles to the lots being sold. And I have to say to the National Party that I don't think that reflects very well on this House, because this has been on Jackie Dean says it had 3 years on the order paper under Labour. That's not correct, because I wasn't Minister of Land Information for 3 years, and it was actually me that put it in the original rolled bill. What is correct is that at the end of the last Parliament, it was in a rolled bill. Ever since then, it has been able to be passed within a week.
Yeah, wasn't a priority?
Within a week, but it wasn't a priority for the government. Now, the government then decided, look, we'll start this process again, despite the fact that all of these things were looked into by a prior select committee looking at the Reserves and Other Land Disposal Bill. They thought, oh, we'll do it again through a local bill. Well, sorry, not the government, but the local member. And I think the local member was right to do that. And Jackie Dean is to be congratulated for doing that, because there was no other way forward, because the government refused to bring this forward on the order paper. A couple of things, sir. The paper record of this is tortured. It's so tortured that the select committee that last looked at it were persuaded by a submission from Barry Monks, who had turned up an archive that no one else had turned up. And Barry Monks is to be congratulated for finding a paper trail in this that none of the departments, as far as I'm aware, had found. And that paper trail appeared to say that this was a reserve rather than a piece of endowment land. But there were bits of information that went both ways. And so the select committee said, well, look, the only way to sort this out is for the select committee to get some legal advice as to, on the basis of all of this paper that has now been found and the full history that was then available, to clarify whether at law it is endowment land or reserve land. And sadly for Barry Monks and for the other people in Oamaru who feel very strongly that this is properly classified as a reserve, the proper advice is that on the balance of the evidence, it is endowment land. And so a decision has to be taken. The select committee on both sides of the House reached the conclusion that it was properly endowment land and therefore it ought to be sold, which, of course, was the effect of the provision in the Reserves and Other Land Disposal Bill as a consequence of the process that we went through when I was considerably younger. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, one further point. We hear this described as Lookout Point. I know that one of the issues that vexes some of the local opponents to this is they think that misdescribes this land, because the land locally is known as Forrester Heights, which is part of Lookout Point. Lookout Point includes some very important reserves, and there is no doubt that a lot of the land on Lookout Point is a reserve. There are walking tracks on it. It's not part of this land adjacent to the road, which is Forrester Heights subdivision. Lookout Point goes further than that. So I want to put on record for the satisfaction of those people who are interested in that issue that I agree with them that it's properly described as Forrester Heights rather than Lookout Point. But the legal description of the land, which is what matters in this bill, is correct. So, Mr. Speaker, it is a shame that the finances of the Council are worse because there has been so much delay in passing the original piece of legislation, which still languishes on the order paper. Do you know, this Parliament could have passed the original bill, not just fix this problem, but about the dozen other issues that are also fixed in the Reserves and Other Land Disposal Bill, which was going to fix similar problems in other parts of the country, in the same time that it's taken us to pass this bill. In fact, there would have been a lot less waste of select committee time doing again what has already been done. But no, it has been chosen to proceed by way of the local bill because the member for Waitaki, Jackie Dean, became frustrated that her government wouldn't pass the Reserves and Other Land Disposal Bill, which was of identical effect in respect of the Forrester Heights land, and found that to advance that, the member had to advance a local bill. It is a pity that this couldn't have been advanced as a part of the Reserves and Other Land Disposal Bill, but I'm sad for the people who think that they were right. And in terms of their criticisms of the council, could I also say that the confusion that reigned in this wasn't the fault of either the council or the people who thought from the paper record that this was properly reserved land. It was a truly confusing set of affairs. I'm not criticising anyone on either side of the debate. Sadly, in the end, when there is a dispute as to what is the correct state of affairs, someone eventually has to make a decision. Otherwise, these things just go on until I'm retired, and even older.
After the
But Mr. Speaker, the reality is that in the end, where there is a dispute, someone has to take a decision eventually. In this case, both sides of Parliament have looked at it responsibly in a principled manner, have applied the law, which is our duty to do, and we have found that this is endowment land and that accordingly the Labour Party will be voting for this bill.
And we're talking about leadership. See, that silly beaver over there.
Order.
On about leadership.
Order. Order. I call the honourable member Margie Bowrie.